to Adapt It, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Pat.
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing Everybody Comes to Rick's and Mrs. Miniver from 1940 and 1939 respectively, and their adaptations, Casablanca and Mrs. Miniver from 1943 and 1942 respectively. All right, so here we're going to be exploring Abandoning Neutrality. America Returns to the Front. And I think our first product here is going to be Mrs. Miniver. And that was a collection initially of vignettes of stories by Jan Struther, which ran in the Times from 1937 to 1939. And they followed a middle class woman, Mrs. Miniver, her family, and their goings on, and they're very slight stories. They're little actions that happen to a woman who's happily married with a happy family living in England in the late 1930s. If you see the movie, you'll be quite surprised by the story, as they virtually have nothing to do with each other except for the names of the characters.
Yeah, I'm so glad I spent all that time reading that book and then going, there is nothing that is related to this movie.
There's nothing apparently. Maybe the car they purchase is a similar price, but other than that, there is no relation.
I get the impression that what the stories were is sort of and I this isn't like an exact analogy, but they almost have this sort of like Liz Lemon, Jerry Seinfeld feel like less zany, but they're just these sort of observation comic kind of thing. And sometimes she's got sort of profound points that she actually brings up in the stories. But that's the impression that I got from them. They're just little quick stories. They're funny. They often have some sort of profound point. Some of them I laugh at. I tell people about, like, there's one great one where she talks about how they're going through they need to invite somebody over for dinner, and they're like, oh man, we've gone through all the good couples. We're down to the couples where only one of the people is good and the other one is terrible. And they're like, so we don't know how to invite them. And so they finally just decide to invite them all, and then they're just going to pair up the terrible people with the terrible people, and the good people, they'll sit near them, and then they'll have a good dinner. So it's like, you can see that being like a Seinfeld kind of conversation. And so it has that feel to it. So I think all they did was just say, this woman is popular, let's just use the name. It would be like if the war happened now and or maybe 10 years, because I don't know who's popular now, but like 10 years ago, if the war happened and it was like Liz Lemon goes to war, it would be like that kind of thing where it's like we're just taking a figure that's popular and putting them out there in order to get the masses interested.
That seems to be the effect. And you get towards the end of the story collection a sort of British nationalism, which isn't at the beginning, which is this idea of there's a war coming and we kind of have to do it. There's one very famous vignette where they get the gas masks, and they're apparently rationed gas masks, and they're showing the children the gas masks, and the youngest child, Toby, is scared, and they have to take the gas mask off and show, no, this is mom. So there's this hint of war, and there's one scene where there's a woman on a park bench who's kind of talking about how the war isn't coming, that's not going to be a problem. And Mrs. Miniver, at least in her internal monologue, dismisses her. And towards the end, you start to get letters about the war, and her husband starts participating in some way, though I don't remember. So there is a sort of slice of life. It's interesting. It's a slice of life outtake, but it does towards 1939 include these episodes, and you sort of get the general feeling of the average Brit towards the war. I think that's compelling. But otherwise, I think you're right, Pat. I think they're like, here's a popular character, people who know her, and let's turn that character into a um, a, 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 a signal for America's involvement in the war. which is interesting because she's a British character, but the movie is obviously an American production. Um, and it was wildly successful. I mean, wildly successful. It was produced by MGM, and during the production, Pearl Harbor happened. And apparently, they changed some of the scenes after Pearl Harbor happened. Louis B. Mayer, who was very cautious about appearing too political, he ran MGM, and MGM is named for him, initially wanted the scene in which Mrs. Miniver discovers the German to be less cruel towards the German, which the director Wilder hated. After Pearl Harbor, he called up Wilder and said, do the original thing you were going to do because it's okay now. It's fine.
I
And
mean, they're pretty nice to the German, though, right? I don't
oh,
know.
I think it was what Mayer was worried about was the German was going to look too much like a stereotypical villain, like they wanted to give him some kind of human quality, and the German is
Oh,
kind
okay.
of like
He's very, yeah.
evil, yeah, you know. But Mrs.
He's
Miniver,
got that sort of, yeah, he's got sort of a squirrel-like quality. He keeps grabbing things, and yeah, they certainly do that. Okay.
yeah, but he's also like, we're going to invade, and
Oh,
we're
I
going
forgot
to
about
be
that.
in
Yeah, yeah.
Berlin, and we're going to kill all of you. You know,
I
it's
kind
like
of blocked out some of those those parts
it's a
when it got
it's a
very
vanity,
propaganda-y. It was just kind of
yeah.
like, all right, I guess we're gonna get through this
Yeah,
speech.
yeah. Propaganda speech. But it was wildly successful. So one stat I looked up was MGM made $12 million in profit in when this movie came out, what, 1942? Mrs. Miniver was responsible for $9 million of those 12 million. So it was wildly, wildly successful. It was the Titanic of its day. My understanding is its Oscar wins were not a surprise. Everybody just assumed the people who won the Oscars, who won it for Mrs. Miniver, would win it. They did win it. Nobody said anything about it, and that was it. Um, but the stories, I will say, the stories are written really well. I like her prose style.
The
It has a sort
stories
of,
are fun. Yeah, the
yeah.
book is fun. The movie, I mean, I think there's a reason no one watches it, but okay, that's that.
Yeah. But I mean, so I don't have that much more to say about the stories, other than they do have a sort of what would you say? Joie de vivre would be the pretentious little phrase to describe them. I think they do have a kind of liveliness to them.
Yeah, they're fun. Like I
Yeah.
laughed. Like, again, there's a great like I like, even I was telling my wife some of the stories and we laughed because it's things that we still do. Like it has the stories have sort of a timeless quality. I love the one, there's a great one where she's debating with herself as she's driving home and the windshield wipers are going and they're making like a squeaking sound and she's like, I can't tell what they're saying. It sounds like they're saying something like the windshields and she's like, are they saying like green ham, like green ham, green. And so she's kind of, and she's coming up with different phrases as she's going and thinking. And then she's finally gets home and she's like, they're saying like baked beans or something. And then she goes into her husband and she's like, baked beans, that's what they're saying. And the husband's like, that's what it is, and that's how the story ends. So the joke being like, this is a sequence between a husband and wife that no one else will have any clue what they're talking about, and they'll think the person's completely insane. But that's the kind of thing that is just kind of funny when people do that, and husbands and wives have conversations like that, and then they sort of have these things that no one else would understand, but they know what they're talking about. And that was the point of that little vignette, and it's full of little things like that. It's just fun. Like they're fun little stories. I enjoyed them. They had nothing to do with the movie.
Mhm. Exactly. Do we want to get into the movie and what's appealing about the movie and maybe why, though this was a huge hit in its day, it does not seem to be something people talk about as a great classic or watch anymore? Maybe that's pretty obvious. I will say my experience watching the movie was for the first half of it, I was not that interested. Once we get to the Dunkirk sequence, and the sequences after that, I actually found the movie a lot more appealing. The Dunkirk sequence is filmed in an interesting way. I think the bunker sequence when they're trapped out there is also really interesting, and I think it's actually very surprising when they deal with the lord, the lady who is a member of the peerage who lives in that neighborhood and is the grandmother of Teresa Wright's character, the main female love interest. How they deal with her is surprising in its own way and very enjoyable. And I think the second half of the movie is really kind of, I think, very attractive, even if it's very obvious. What did you guys think of it?
I have some questions actually about what happened in the movie and did they happen in the book.
It didn't
First
happen
one,
in the
No.
book.
no,
The
The
answer
answer
is
is
it
no.
no.
wasn't.
Nothing that
Okay,
happened in the movie happened in the book other than them buying a car.
Right.
well that's easy then, because they come back to the house after it's been bombed, and I'm just thinking they should have a structural engineer or somebody look at it, but they're just living in it like it's a cartoon or
Yeah, I
something.
don't
That
think
the
they had a
house is.
choice. There was no structural engineers. They were gone. They were out at the front. Like
Yeah,
they would have been building barricades and trying to, build defensive networks. There was no one there. You just lived through it. I think that's the point of the movie. Is like, well, the house blown up. Hopefully it doesn't. I mean, you can read like if you ever read what's it called? End of the Affair. End of the Affair deals with like a bunch of characters living through the Blitz, and they talk about it all the time. They're like, yeah, I really hope my building doesn't collapse because it got bombed last night, but I got nowhere else to go. So that's what they did. They were just like, yeah,
wow.
I really hope this my stairwell stays because I don't know how I'm gonna get to work if my stairwell collapses. Like that's the kind of thing. They're like, oh, it'll be a pain. I'm gonna have to like get a rope. Like they're literally that's the kind of things that are going on there. Just like, yeah, nope, just keep going.
Hmm. And then the other one, Tom, you brought up the bunker scene. If you compare that to the bunker scene in All's Quiet, there's so much more tension in All Quiet. There was almost none I felt in um, Mrs. Miniver, and I don't know if it's just because I had checked out after the first half of the movie or what, but I
Why,
was like,
why would you have done that? I will say, I didn't hope by the first half of the movie, I really was hoping Vin was gonna die.
Hmm.
And by the second half, I didn't hope that as much. And I know this is like this is a very jaded modern response to it, but it's so it's propaganda in the beginning, and it's so obvious. Like when they're like, "I'm gonna buy a fancy hat, and I'm going to buy a fancy car," and it'll be like, oh, but later on we can't afford these luxuries. Like it's just so obvious what's going on with it. It's really painful. Um in this and again with like the super earnest son who's like, I'm going to join the RAF and his terrible attempt at a British accent that American could not do British accent. So it's there are some significant problems with that first half. Um but it got better.
Yeah, I like the bunker scene. And I think the bunker scene was, for me, even though it doesn't have the tension, it also doesn't have the stakes of All Quiet. I mean, All Quiet is these people are being shot at continuously. With the bunker in Mrs. Miniver, the impression, first of all, what I liked about it was nothing about the Blitz is actually being referenced. The entire conversation is about playing cards or what they're doing or whatnot. They're actually not referencing the condition that they're in. And it's also really focused on the children and the children's experience and how they can, guard the children against waking up or what have you. I mean, it's effectively a domestic movie. And that's going to be the difference in tension between All Quiet and this. It's a domestic look at war, while All Quiet is a look at war from the front. And I think the bunker scene brings that out because of what it really is about, which is this family that's trying to survive. Then I also liked how
I thought that
go for it.
I thought that would have been more relatable, as I've never, thank goodness, been in a war. But I think if Mrs. Miniver was either more, if it was better made or better constructed, it would have been like, oh man, if a war came to my house, that's what it would feel like. And I would think the tension would be greater than in All's Quiet.
I don't think I agree, but I think the difference is that the what I think this because it's just it's a question of perspective. Like I will bet I don't know, but I'll bet some other movie out there has portrayed the Blitz accurately. What this movie is trying to do is sort of be like this is the not how it actually is. They didn't this is how you should behave. So it's like, it's okay if you're scared. It's okay if your kids are crying, but you gotta, the keep calm and carry on. It's like, it's more a like, and that's why the movie's just annoying at certain points, because it, we don't care to a certain extent. We're not looking to this movie for advice, and this movie is dispensing it whether you want that advice or not. So in this instance, I think that's why certain scenes just feel very hollow, because they're not trying to actually depict it or to get the audience to understand what the experience is like. They're trying to tell the audience what they should do and how they should think about the things that are going on right now. Which is that, it's got a whole thing about classism. There's a whole thing of like the peer, as Tom said, the peerage lady, the middle class, and then Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life at the bottom. I was really glad to see Clarence. I've never seen another
He won
movie
an
with
Oscar for that role.
Really?
He won an Oscar for this role.
Oh God, he's the same guy. He's the same thing. He could be carrying around Tom Sawyer. He could be carrying around Alice in Wonderland instead of Tom Sawyer. It'd be the same character. He's great, but he's fine. But it was nice to see him. I never knew he won an Academy Award. Anyway, it's a good, but there's clearly a classist thing going on there, and there's sort of this element of, we all have to overcome our classism and and unite in a common front. And look, the peerage lady is letting everybody into her basement to act as a bomb shelter, and she's letting the Cockney guy win the rose competition, and the Cockney guys are ringing the bells and fighting and it's very much this sort of rah 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 kind of thing. And just watching it, I'm like, oh, I really don't care about that. Like
Yeah.
and it's not just a callousness to it. It's just that isn't, you're not displaying this thing to me. You're not displaying classism to me and helping me to experience. You're telling me how I should react to something that has nothing to do with what I do or how I see the world. So I think that's why it doesn't last, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it is you're right. It's this idea of nationalism over class, right? We have to become a nation now. We can't be a British society of class. You have to overcome classism. I think there are moments that really do work. I do think the older peerage lady.
Her scenes are great. She's wonderful. I hope she won an Academy. Did she win an Academy Award?
No, it was
Why? She's the best character in the movie.
Teresa Wright.
She did win, but when she went up, she said the other guy's name.
Yeah,
and so
then they
you
gave it to
got
the
it.
other lady. I mean, she's great. She's the best. She is the best thing.
She's the
in that
best part
movie.
of it. It's actually the woman who dies won the other Oscar. So the star, the Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, and then Teresa Wright, who played the war widow, or not the war widow, excuse me. Her husband becomes widowed. She won an Oscar also. She also,
I mean, that lady should have, the old lady should have won the best
Yeah.
supporting actress. There is no doubt in my mind. I don't know, whoever won that year, they stole it.
well, it would be Teresa Wright, who in the same movie stole it
Oh,
from.
I thought she won best actress.
No. Teresa Wright was the not her. Greer Garson played Miniver. She won Best Actress.
Oh, she won. Oh,
Teresa
I see the problem
Wright,
now.
who
I see the
played
problem now. Okay,
the
fine.
young Mrs.
Got it.
Miniver. She won Best Supporting Actress. Walter Pidgeon lost to Yankee Doodle Dandy to what's his name, James Cagney, and then this movie.
Okay,
swept all
okay.
the
I
other
understand the
awards.
problem. I understand my problem. I was mixing up my roles.
Yeah, but one of my favorite scenes in the movie was when the peerage lady goes to the family and is like, I really don't want them to get married. And you think it's because it's a class thing. And it turns out she doesn't want her granddaughter to marry somebody who's going to war because she married somebody who went to war and died. He died. And I know how that feels, and I don't want her to experience that. I really like that scene. I mean,
I was shocked, and I
yeah.
thought, oh my gosh, they did something unique.
Mhm.
That was cool. Because again, to your point, I thought there was going to be that exact thing where they were just going to turn this into it, because they're talking a lot about class and it's clearly trying to make it about class, and they want telling everyone to ignore class. And I thought that was going to be, and they were really clever. They took the clever route on that scene and basically made it like, oh no, we're not going to just disparage the upper class and show them at their worst. We're going to show them as kind, loving people who have suffered as well. I'm like, oh, that's good. That's like a good touch. It shocked me because this movie lacked many of those. But that it has when it hits the mark, you see why it was really effective, or at least why it still carries some merit. Um, and those are great moments. There's a couple other moments where they actually don't go into the expectation they don't just lean into the expectation you have, and those are the best moments of the movie, and they work really well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think there are moments where you get a little bit more of showing, not telling. In this movie's a lot of telling, especially the last speech by the Anglican priest. Uh, but I think when they return to the house and
I
you
was just
see,
I was waiting for Churchill to just show up and
oh,
basically be
I
like, "We
know.
will fight them on."
Well,
Like, oh wow,
he,
they pulled him
yeah,
right out.
apparently he sped this movie into theaters. There's so many quotes of Churchill saying like, "This movie is worth more than, 100,000 battleships," and things like that. Churchill was a huge advocate of this movie, and he worked hard to get this movie into theaters as soon as possible. So this movie was an active part of the propaganda. Like the government was using this movie to propagandize people pretty actively. But another moment I really liked was when the son comes home and they return to the bombed out house. And the way they do it is the family has already seen the bombed out house, but you don't see that the family has seen the bombed out house already. And so they have a very casual feel to it. They're not you don't see them shocked or falling over or despairing. They're just kind of see the house and get over it. And granted, like you said, Pat, it's an exemplar of how you are supposed to behave. Like, yes, you're going to lose your house. You need to just stick your chin up and deal with it. But it's sort of a nice way of doing it. No one is talking about, oh no, we lost our house. We have to get over it. They just sort of look around the house and there you go. And I think the compositions that Wilder creates at that point are really nice as well. And the movie has a lot of those moments. I think the Dunkirk scene is really nice. I mean, they
That's the
keep
best. I mean, I will say the lady scene and the Dunkirk scene are good. Those actually work. The Dunkirk scene's great. It's kind of eerie when the battleship's just talking to them. I don't know if that was intentional, but it has a very surreal feel to it.
Mhm. Yeah, and it looks like a painting. See, I don't know how they did that shot where you see all of the ships going through the channel. It's yeah, it's very, very effective. And I I by the end of the movie I enjoyed it. I would say the first half I was like you know, I want
Again,
this
I
to
just wanted
stop
them to
being
kind of die, and I kind of it
it's
was really annoying
it's
first half of
really
that movie.
hard, especially with the son who apparently he went
Gee
on had
Willikers, Dad, you think I could be an RAF officer? Yes,
yeah.
son, you have it in you. You go fight in the war. Like it just it's
Yeah. Yeah, he's not Richard Ney, who went on to be a very successful investor and wrote a ton of books on investment. Apparently he left acting. I guess he was not
that
the
was a
best
wise
actor.
choice.
It was a wise choice, but he was a very good investor. So he has quite a publication history on investment. But and he was also dating the woman who played his mother during during the filming. But anyway, in the beginning, you see him as this kind of idealistic person, and he's kind of put in his place by the woman who eventually will be his wife, Carol Belden, played by Teresa Wright. And it's a really hard scene to get through. I mean, he's not very good in it. She is every cliche you can think. And as I'm watching this scene, going, "Oh God, this movie is going to be intolerable." And it does improve. It does lean more on the filmmaking. And even the scene with the bunker, I know, KJ, we weren't fond of it, but they don't. What I liked about it, initially, you don't realize they're in a bunker until Mr. Miniver, the father, leans back and hits a sort of canteen. And at that point, you realize, oh, they're not in a bedroom. Everything they need to eat is right by their head. And so it takes a moment to realize they're in a bunker. There's no establishing shot going in there. And there's little things like that aren't brilliant. They're not genius, but they have a little bit of a touch. They're a little bit creative in the way they're setting things up. And I guess if you're making a propaganda movie, at a time when propaganda was, was really in demand. I don't know how much better you're going to do than this, right?
You make Casablanca. I mean,
I
that
guess, or you make
that
Casablanca doesn't. The thing is, though, Casablanca doesn't feel like a propaganda movie, even if it
exactly.
is.
But it is, and
Mhm.
this is. I mean, I don't know if we're transitioning yet, but
I think we
this
just did. Yes.
okay. But this is it is a propaganda movie, and the main and it is anyway. I would have argued it anyway. It's a much better and a much subtler one, but especially now that I've read the play, this is the argument I would make is that it absolutely is a propaganda movie because if the play was written in what you said 1939, 1940,
Yeah, I think so.
then there is a big change they make between the play and the movie, and I think that's what really makes it a propaganda film.
Okay. And what does that change?
It's what they do to Louis
Hmm.
because the whole thing, I've seen Casablanca many times. Louis always kind of he's always kind of troubled me as a figure because it's weird what they do with him because he's sort of, and they do establish like, okay, he and Rick have a good rapport and they have a really good relationship, but he's a pretty sleazy guy. Like he's basically making women sleep with him so that he can get them out of Casablanca. So, okay, we could kind of say, okay, we could pass that off, but he's pretty active in assisting the Germans right up until the very end. He even calls Strasser when they have, when he's basically Rick's like, call the airport and tell them to let him go. And he calls Strasser. If Rick had been killed, he would have just gone right back to his old things. Like, you don't get the impression that Louis would have changed very much. And that's the Louis in the play. Louis in the play essentially is that straight through all the way. So if you saw the play, if the play had ever been produced in 1939, 1940, what you would have seen is the gallant American sort of, falling for the cause because he doesn't actually get away in the end of the play. He gives himself up and he's taken away by Strasser and by Louis. So, it's the gallant American sort of falling on his sword for the greater cause. And Louis is just going along with the show. So you would have basically seen a gallant American and the Vichy France capitulator. That's what you would have seen. And I don't think by once America enters the war, they don't want that to be the message. They want it to be the gallant American who's gonna go off with his gallant, Frankish, friend and their Gallic friend, and they're gonna go join the resistance, and this thing. That's what it's trying to do. And I think that's a huge important change. They were not going to just depict the French as the Vichy. They were going to actually give them an active role in overcoming the situation and then going off to resist. I think it really becomes a propaganda piece because of that change, which always has struck me as a little artificial. And now I get why it is because it's not in there originally.
Yeah, it is. That's always true. It bothered me about Louis Renaud, the captain. Also, there's that scene which actually was the Jack Warner's stepdaughter plays her, the Belgian refugee. So the producer's stepdaughter, but where she sort of goes to Rick and is like, is Louis going to keep his word? And you don't, and what she means really is, if I sleep with him, will he get me out of here? And I remember watching that scene like several times and being like, is that what she means? I don't, he does that? And Louis eventually goes, when she gets the money, um, Rick allows them to win at roulette. He kind of goes, "Oh, I'm glad young love won out." Renaud says that. Louis says, "I'm glad young love won out." And then he tells Rick, there's a blonde coming in next. I hope she does not win. I would prefer her not to win. And he goes, "Oh, yeah. He was going to make this young woman sleep with him to get her out of Casablanca. That's really creepy. But he's so charming."
There's other references to it too. There's a great reference to that in the when they're waiting when what's his name? The resistance guy. I can't remember his name.
Oh, Laszlo.
Laszlo. When Laszlo and they're in the office there and they say something to Louis and they say, one of the guys comes in and he says, there's a question on a visa and Louis goes, "Oh, show her right in." And it's like, he has an entire network doing this for him.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other joke that Rick makes, and I forget exactly how it goes, but they're talking and he goes, somebody says to Rick, "Oh, and the husband too," and he goes, "Oh, Louis becoming more
Yeah.
Oh
open-minded,"
yeah, that was a good one.
suggesting
That
that,
actually was
yeah,
a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the he's so Claude Rains is so charming and so funny that it's weird, right? Like, and
Yeah, that's what
maybe it's
it's
from
always
current sense of it.
bugged me. And
Yeah.
I think, well, I think you're meant, what I think you're meant to do is sort of equate his sort of, basically sexual trafficking with Rick's, it's essentially Rick isn't doing sexual trafficking, but that's sort of what Rick is doing. Rick's selling out people. He's just trying to, live, he's trying to bury all his emotions and live by money and all this kind of stuff and whatever it is. So I think you're meant to see them as sort of kindred spirits in the sense that they're both pretending sort of to be neutral and just taking advantage of this current situation. But it does feel like Louis, I mean, again, in the play, there is no doubt Louis is 100%. That's exactly what he's doing. He's selling all of these women in order to get exit visas. He's trying to get money out of people, and he does not redeem himself in the end. And that's the problem and so you can see the parallel between him and Rick, but Rick redeems himself in the end. But in the movie, Louis doesn't. Louis just kind of keeps going along, and then they tack on his sort of happy ending, and it feels fake.
Yeah, and we should probably get into the play. In the play with they're not Belgian, they're Bulgarian. The Bulgarian couple, what happens in the play is different. Um, Basically, Louis, in front of the husband of the woman, starts to romance the woman. The husband, not realizing what is happening, because his wife didn't tell him,
And Louis
punch.
literally says, "You're an idiot. Just let me have my way, and you'll get your visa." He literally
Yeah,
says it to him. He's like, "Just stand aside, and you'll get your visa. Go away. I'm going. Basically, I'm going to sleep with your wife. Go away."
yeah, and so the husband punches him, and what Rick does is he turns out the lights at that point and hides them, and then Louis closes down Rick's cafe and says, "I'm getting them. I'm punishing them, and your cafe is closed until I do it." And so Rick gives the exit visas, which were signed by De Gaulle in the movie. I don't think they are in the play. De Gaulle might
They're
not have.
not. They don't mention De Gaulle, but I think De Gaulle is just well known enough. It's
Yeah,
it's not. Yeah, it's not De Gaulle. It's
somebody else.
Patan. It's Patan, I
Patan,
think.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
De Gaulle. They wouldn't have respected his signature on those. Patan, they
the,
might have.
yeah. But and they give Rick gives the visas to them, and he basically puts the gun to Renault and says they're getting out, and then Rick gets arrested. But it's harsh. I mean, Renault he is going to destroy these people's lives in order to sleep with this woman and humiliate her husband while doing it. There is nothing charming about him. He is probably the villain of the piece. In
Yeah,
the film, they move that to Strausser. They move that to the Germans. But here, it is Renault. Like Strausser just doesn't have as large a role, and it's kind of hard to get over. And I think, yeah, maybe you're right, Pat, that you give Claude Rains as Louis. First of all, Claude Rains is much. He's somebody you can forgive. Let's say he's an actor who you can forgive his character. But you make him a little more gentle. You make him very funny. He is very funny. He's not in the play. The line about "I am shocked. There's gambling going on here. You're winning, sir. Thank you." That crap that's not going on in the play. And I guess you do it as you're saying to be like, give him a redemptive arc so we could see the American and the Frenchman standing up against the Germans. There's some kind of pleasure in that. And now, don't you want to stand up against the Germans in our next battle with them, or something like that? It's also just in terms of the entertainment value, it's far more fun in the film than in the play. I mean, Claude Rains' version of this character, he's cool, he's enjoyable, he kind of gets the scene. You appreciate his competency. You can appreciate his competency because you never see his cruelty exactly. It's kind of behind the scene. That works much, much well. But Pat, I think you're right. It is ultimately a join the fight ending. Like, now you should join the fight as well. And the fact that these characters get away with it when they don't in the play is I don't know. I mean, more encouraging, right? You don't see the characters punished for joining the resistance. You see them kind of get away coolly, and maybe so can you. Apparently, I mean, this is based upon the scene that this husband and wife playwright went to. They went to Casablanca and kind of saw the scene, and it's based on a famous bar that was there at the time. So it was kind of what was going on, and it is an interesting space, right? It is like
The
Casablanca
space is great. I was
in this
much
movie.
more. I feel like I hadn't noticed, you're right, the space as much until I watched it this time. And it's really fun how they open it. I really like how they show the sort of market scenes. I don't remember, and then they go into Rick's. There's a lot more. It is a place. It is a place with a sense of scene, or scene with a sense of place,
Mhm,
whatever you want to say. But I will agree. It actually felt much more grounded than I had noticed before when
mhm.
I watched it this time.
Yeah, and there's a balance here between what I'm thinking of, or what the movie is portraying as the sort of sleaze of the place, like people are robbing you and barely struggling to survive and desperate to get out of there. And this sort of romantic beauty of it. There's something beautiful about the desperation of the place, where everybody doesn't have enough money and yet they can look glamorous and drink at this lovely bar while listening to this great music. And there it has this, yeah, kind of sense of I guess what you call romantic desperation, right? It's not
It's the
actual
romantic
desperation.
desperation of a desert flower.
Fair enough. It's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I guess also gets you, kind of into the war effort, right? It's going to be these kind of exotic and sexy places that you're going to visit and what have you. But yeah, it is one of the great scenes, I think. The fact that it was all filmed on a lot, not regardless, it is a yeah, it is a place you want to visit and live in, right? Like that's one of the things. Like everybody's desperate to get out of there, but it looks gorgeous. It looks like
Yeah, I never
so
understood
much
why they
fun.
wanted to get out of there. I'm
Yeah.
like, why are they all want to leave? This place looks great. They have lovely hotel rooms. They have this beautiful bar with this music. Why are they trying to get out of there? I didn't, but I get it. I mean, I think the implication is like they have no money and they're all going to starve there eventually. But while they're there, it's beautiful.
Well, and the Germans are coming, right?
The
Like,
Germans weren't though. They weren't going to go in there. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, it was
oh,
neutral
No.
space.
It was neutral space. They weren't going to go in there. I mean, eventually they probably would, but um, even unoccupied France eventually just got occupied. But for the moment, it seemed like a good place to be.
Yeah.
I liked how they showed the other bar as kind of what Rick's could have been. It kind of elevated Rick's because that other bar was kind of meh.
The Blue Parrot.
The Blue Parrot.
Oh yeah, with the fat man, with Gutman.
Hmm.
Yeah, with Gutman.
Sydney Green Streets.
I love Sydney Greenstein. I can't remember what the character's name actually was in the movie, but yeah, that place had a little bit of like the feeling of like a poolside, whatever bar in Costa Rica or something, where it's just sort of like, yeah, it's nice, but it's not Rick's.
Signor Ferrari. That's what
Senor
it
Ferrari, that's what it was.
Yeah. And of course, Peter Lorre. Um, Always unconquerable Peter Lorre.
So I have a question. This is my
Mhm.
my trivia question. I can't remember if I asked you guys this before or we discussed this one. Who is the only character who's in or actor who's in both Mrs. Miniver and Casablanca?
Oh, it's the German, isn't it?
The German is the
Mm.
the guy who plays the German
Hmm.
and Mrs. Miniver is in Casablanca. Who is he in Casablanca?
Is he the Russian bartender?
Nope.
Oh, who is he?
He's the husband. He's the
Oh, he's
husband
the
who's the
husband
of the he's the
of the
husband.
woman who's getting the Bulgarian.
The woman
Um,
who's yeah, the woman who's yeah, the
mhm.
Bulgarian husband. He's the only one who's in
Oh,
both of the movies.
oh, very good. I wonder what his name
Thank you,
is.
little Amazon pop-up thing when you click on the things and it says other movies this actor has been in, and I'm like, oh, this guy was in Casablanca.
Yeah. My favorite still is Marcel Dalio, who's the guy who runs the roulette table, who is in The Rules of the Game, which is one of my favorite movies, the Renoir film, The Rules of the Game. He's the guy who runs the house, who owns the big house and the rules of the game. He's a really funny actor. Have you seen that movie, Pat?
No.
No. That's
Have
we
you
did
seen it,
it on.
Cantor?
Yeah, we did it on Talking Picture Trivia.
Oh
You
no, I
should
haven't
put it
seen
towards the top of your
it.
list, Pat. It's really good.
Oh, what is it? Who did it?
Renoir did it in the 30s.
Oh, Renoir.
Yeah, it's
Oh, so it's earlier. Oh, interesting.
yeah. So he was like a French star at the time. I guess he wasn't as well known, but he is the star of that film, and he's really, really funny. Um, it's a
Oh,
really
it'll
good
be
movie.
fun.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. The thing that I always find interesting about Casablanca, I just want to throw this out there and see if anyone has thoughts. And I know we kind of alluded to this, but why? Whenever I talk about movies, and I always say, there's a number of movies, the modern movies that do this, and they have a point, and they want you to get to the point, and they often ruin the movie because they just can't help themselves from making you get the point. Was it Knives Out is the one that I always point
Oh
that I always
yes.
point out because that movie has a message. If it just didn't focus so much on its message and just left it, it would work really well. I would have totally got the message and I would have actually really appreciated it a lot more. But I think it ruins itself because it does that. But Casablanca has a message. It wants you to know what that message is. It puts it right in your face, and yet it still works. Why does it work with? I don't have an answer to this. Why does it work with Casablanca, but it doesn't work with most other films where they have a message, they have a point, they put that point very front and center, and yet you don't get angry with it and hate it.
Because Knives Out is sneering at the people it doesn't like, right?
But
It's
this
like
is sneering at the Germans.
it kind. Yeah, I mean,
It's not as if it's like Strasser isn't a good guy who you just
no, he isn't.
misunderstood.
But the Knives Out has this kind of like ironic way of approaching these kind of questions. Like everybody's kind of despicable except the woman who we like, the maid who ends up inheriting the money, and then the main character who ends up accidentally dying. And Daniel Craig's character, we like him as well. But she sort of also has a kind of Betty Sue quality to her. Like nothing she does is wrong. Even her mistakes are kind of correct. And so there's this kind of it's everybody who isn't on her team is despicable. The movie seems to be kind of sneering at its audience in a lot of ways, and the audience for Casablanca are not the Germans. They're like the people who would appreciate Strauss are not watching this movie, right? It's not a
But
movie.
why are we still watching it and thinking it's a good movie? Like as opposed to I mean, I know we kind of did get to this a little bit with Mrs. Miniver, but it's like there is no way that anyone's going to watch Mrs. Miniver nowadays and think that it's a good movie. But Casablanca, you sort of what its point is, and it again like, and I know what the point of Mrs. Miniver is, and Mrs. Miniver when it tells me its point really bothers me. It's just annoying. But Casablanca when it doesn't bother me.
Because I think what we like about it, I think we like the friendship between Renal and Rick. And I think we like that friendship beyond merely the political or propagandistic elements of it. They're cool together. They talk fast. They talk smart. Rick is the embodiment of the kind of romantic loner who's given up on things, but really hasn't, right? He, isn't delivering speeches or whatnot. He's cool. I mean, I think that's the thing. People want to be Rick regardless of what political circumstance you're in. I would love to be Rick now, even though we're not going to war or in a war or whatnot, right? You want to be Rick. He has got the best job. He's the coolest guy. He's the best looking guy. He lives in this beautiful space and nothing bothers him and he's utterly competent. That's what you're drawn to the movie. And I think the propagandistic element isn't so upsetting because it's not ironic and it's not angry. Like when they sing the French national anthem,
Yeah, that's a great scene.
it's
And
a
I guess
great
that's the thing is
scene.
it's really obvious what they're doing, but feel it just doesn't feel tacked on, it doesn't feel tacky. That feels significant, like
Mhm.
really significant. When he goes over and says the like play the Marseillaise, but I mean it's like oof, you got it. Like there's
Yeah.
no sense there that it's fake.
Mhm.
So is that
But
just
I
what it
think
is?
it's
That it's
just
more
there's
a
a
depiction?
foundation. There's a setting you want to be in that's beautiful and you like, independent of the political circumstance. There's a character who you would want to be or would want to be with, independent of the political circumstance. You would follow that character in like 1970s Ireland or something. Maybe that's not a good example,
But
but
let's just say, but let's go back to our Knives Out example. Like, let's just say that like the whatever the detective's name is character is not quite so kooky and crazy and kind of has that cool Rick quality. And essentially just
it's not
give him
his
this.
story. It's the story of the maid,
Yeah, and
right?
I guess
That's the
that's is that
thing.
the problem
Yeah.
is that that if you just made the exact same character and just made it, but even if you could you do it if you made, actually that would work. Now you've actually worked it. You're right, because that's the big problem with Knives Out, is that it focuses too much on the point it wants you to make. Whereas if you made the story about the detective and just had the point in the background, the point would be more effective because it wouldn't be in your face. Then it's actually probably potentially a
Yeah,
good point.
or if you made the story about the maid, and so much of this, and this is the kind of insulting thing about Knives Out, is if you made a story about her and made a character who wasn't just crushed by her circumstance or a stand-in for her circumstance, then that would work really well. Rick, you could say Rick is a stand-in for Americans who are moving from neutrality to active participation, but Rick is
Abandoning neutrality, like the title
abandoning
of our
neutrality, like the
yeah.
episode. But he's not just a stand-in for that. He's also like a fully fledged out person who was in love and had his heart broken and has a certain cool to him that we want to be, that is independent. And so you take that really great foundation, which is mostly established by Humphrey Bogart and Humphrey Bogart's his intellectual capital, like it's his personal capital, I guess. Humphrey Bogart is always Humphrey Bogart, and you love it. You take all that, you bring it, you establish a story, you establish a setting, you establish an interesting circumstance, and then you do the propaganda stuff. Then you have them sing the Marseillaise. You don't, have like Humphrey Bogart. You don't have some, like Fred MacMurray be that character, right? If Fred MacMurray was just Mr. American Neutrality who participated in some way against the Germans, it wouldn't be very interesting. It would be a little, preachy and what have you. And I think that's what it is. You have to start with really cool, interesting characters who have interests beyond the propaganda of the piece. With the maid in Knives Out, who I'm sure I don't remember the character's name or the actress's name.
By the way, I'm only offering Knives Out as just the most
It's
recent
fine.
example of a decent movie that just had to stick its message in there, and that's
Yeah.
the only reason I'm throwing that one out there. By the way, just
Yeah, I mean, they don't establish much about her. She has a mom. She's working in this place. She has a good relationship. And she's also, like irritatingly competent as opposed to coolly competent.
yeah, that's true.
She
Yeah.
she does everything right because the script tells you she does everything right, not because she's a she not because she's Humphrey Bogart, right? Humphrey Bogart does everything right because Humphrey Bogart has always done everything right in every movie whatsoever. Um, you
Didn't
know,
work out well so well for him in Treasure of the Sierra Madre, but that's okay.
Fair enough. Yeah, there's a few, yeah, I guess.
I'm kidding. I'm
He's a
kidding.
little more bumbling in oh, what's the Africa movie?
African Queen. I was going to say that
African
one
Queen,
too. Yeah,
yeah.
African
Yeah, he's a
African
little more
Queen.
bumbling
But
in Africa.
he is very competent in the sense that he's like, I could forge a bellows out of I can make coal and forge a bellows and fix a propeller. Like he actually does eventually get pushed into it. But
Yeah.
yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. And I think it's, you kind of have to, if you're going to do a propaganda film and you want people to watch it beyond the propaganda, that's what you have to do. And Casablanca has everything, right? It has a great supporting cast too. Like the supporting cast is lovely. Even though Sidney Greenstreet isn't in the movie as much as I would like, he lights the screen up whenever he's on it. And
Yeah,
Claude Rains,
I really want to go watch Maltese Falcon now.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like I watched this, I'm like, man, I want to watch Maltese Falcon. I love that
yeah,
movie.
yeah. And it's just, this movie's just cool, right? It's just cool. You want to be these people, and I think there's no one in Knives Out I want to be. Even the detective is, I don't exactly want to be
Well,
him.
that's what I said. If you had a less kooky, the less
Yeah.
kooky, weird detective character, and you basically had Humphrey Bogart on
Mhm.
stage, let's say, being really cool and collected and doing his thing. But you're right. Then it becomes a totally different movie because there's no way you could have Humphrey Bogart on the stage and not have the movie be about him. That's just,
Yeah.
it, no matter what you do, the movie will just be Humphrey Bogart's movie if
Hmm.
you did that.
Yeah. He just steals the scenes. Yeah.
And then it works
Hmm.
because then it's Humphrey Bogart's movie, and the point with a capital P, with a capital T and a capital P, that the movie wants you to get to the point is not just hammered. It's obvious, but I don't need it hammered to me, and that maybe that is the difference. I don't mind Knives Out. Again, it's just the fact that it has a message. If it's perfectly fine and it's perfectly functional as a mystery, it's just that I have a message I want to get out about, immigrant labor, which is fine, but it just beats you over the head with it. It can't help sure you got the point. But yeah, it's a decent movie. It's perfectly fine. It's just I get irritated with movies that just have a point and they hit you with them and they can't stop hitting you with them. And I find them frustrating. But I don't find Casablanca frustrating, and that's why I was trying to. It's always the example I throw out of, but why does Casablanca work? And maybe that's what it
Yeah.
is. Is it's a lot. It takes a lot more work.
Yeah, because if you have an obvious point, start with character and setting and really build those things up, make those great. If you don't have an obvious point, like if you think of like somebody like Bertolt Brecht, who Brecht's whole thing was, I don't have an obvious answer to any of these problems. We're just going to have a fun time exploring them. Then you do that. You know what I mean? Like you can do
But that doesn't make good propaganda.
it
That's a
doesn't
totally
make good
different type of
propaganda.
film.
That's a different
That's a
thing.
totally type of
Yeah.
film.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, I haven't seen what's the Nazi propaganda? The Sorrow and the Pity?
Triumph of the Will.
Triumph of the Will. Yeah, thank you. I haven't seen that, but I'm
Well,
told that
Triumph of
is
the Will is more.
excellent
It's not a.
propaganda.
Yeah, but that is propaganda. That's like a newsreel essentially.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
more sort of show a demonstration of power sort of thing. It has no plot.
Mhm.
It's just a series of images sort of strung together.
Mhm.
Um, so that is actual propaganda. It has
Yeah.
no. It has no. Has no.
But it
It has
also
no narrative.
supposedly works
Oh, it
also.
does. I mean,
Mhm.
it does in the sense that it's a the woman. What was her name? Can't remember her name.
Yeah, I can't remember either, but
Remember her name, but the
mhm.
woman who made it is clearly a master of her craft in that
Mhm.
sense. But there's no narrative. It's
Mhm.
not pretending to be anything but
Other than what it is.
other than what it is. Whereas like Mrs. Miniver is pretending to be a story. And it is, and again, as we said, it gets better. But Casablanca just is a story, and it's just that the background of it and the point that it makes is just brilliant, and it just works so well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I think that's it.
Maybe
It's
that's it. I think that.
start with things people would like to watch independent of your propaganda. And
And
just
Knives Out does do that, though. I guess Knives Out does do that, though, because it is a movie. If you
mm,
didn't have its point, it would still be an enjoyable film.
mm. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess it's just
Like
I
it could
guess
still
there's
be a
just no
fun mystery story.
charm to it, right? Like the main female actress who goes through these ordeals. There's nothing really. You don't have like the kind of Claude Rains, Humphrey Bogart dialogue. You don't have that background. All the it's all the political circumstance. Um,
Yeah, maybe
I think
that's
that's maybe
also.
that's it. Yeah, it's hard to compete with Humphrey Bogart, regardless.
Maybe that's the message is like because you're right. I mean, if you did Casablanca with almost anybody else, I don't know if it
With
works.
Ross's dad. If Altman did Casablanca
With
with
Iliad
Ross's
Gold.
dad.
Imagine Casablanca with Iliad Gold.
Oh God, yeah. That's but I guess that's the point. But
Mhm.
if you
That's the
did if
point
you
of that
did
movie, man.
But even if you did it with like the dude from Mrs. Miniver, like it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster. No one would care. So maybe it is just sorry. You gotta have you gotta
Yeah,
have Humphrey Bogart.
I because I don't think people watch the movie because they're like, ah, yes, when America joined the war effort. I think they
Yeah,
watch
no
the
one's
movie,
doing that.
yeah, because they're like, damn, I want to be him. I think that's why they're watching. I want to be that good. I want to be that masculine. I think that's why people watch it.
Yeah, I don't know. But I will agree. I think you're on to something, but I think it's a continual discussion that I always have as those kind of movies. But
Yeah. Yeah. They're hard movies to make. Good propaganda or good social problem pictures, and granted they're different, but they're both uniquely difficult to make, I think. If you enjoyed Casablanca and Mrs. Miniver and are looking for more adaptations of Mrs. Miniver, check out the Miniver sequel, the Miniver story from 1950, and the
they
19...
made a sequel
Oh, they made a sequel.
Mrs. Miniver
for
too.
There
what? The
was.
Atomic Age?
It's all about the flower thing. They follow the flower thread. It's got nothing to do with the
I
war.
haven't seen it yet, but it brought back the same actors. So I
God,
guess
they
when you
must have been
make
desperate for work. What
it's,
would-
yeah, it's not as exciting as Titanic 2, but that's I guess what the equivalent would be, right?
yeah, like what? Anyway, sorry,
We have to look up
I
the
messed up
plot
the
there.
outro. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
that's fine. Yeah, the Miniver story from 1950 and the 1960 90-minute TV adaptation with Maureen O'Hara in the role of Mrs. Miniver, or the more recent musical that was produced in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I don't think got much further than Little Rock, Arkansas. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss confronting post-war demons by exploring The Lost Weekend from 1944 and its film adaptation from 1945.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing The Lost Weekend. Pat, if you could give The Lost Weekend an award, what award would it be?
So I have a few variations on a theme, but I'll start with the most jarring use of violin music, just in the like is a very repetitive. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's very repetitive.
It's a theremin, right? I think it's one of the first movies to use a theremin.
Is that what that is?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That would make
It kicked
sense.
off the theremin movement.
The
Audience,
theremin.
get excited to jump right in. It's not a horror movie, it's not a
Like,
sci-fi,
oh
but
God. Oh, the Zoom just popped up and said playing music. No, I was making that noise myself, but thank you.
The human theremin.
But the
Pat the Human Theremin. Ripley's Believe It or Not.
I was wondering. I mean, it was a very X-File-y type of soundtrack, but it also the other variation I would have is best use of scoring to create tension when none actually exists on screen. That
Yeah,
would be
that's a
my
good
other
one, yeah.
would be my other award of sorts. Anyway, KJ, what about you?
Oh, mine is not as good. I have the best end with the same line you started with award.
Oh.
Did it? I didn't notice.
If it didn't, it should have.
It could
Well,
have.
audience, we don't want to spoil anything, but that last line sounded like it could have been the beginning.
Well, if it's the last line, then you could say it was the first. So what was the first line? And then we could decide if it was the last line.
Yeah, audience, let us know on social media if I had it right. I don't remember what it was. It just, the last line sounded like what should
Oh, it
have been
certainly
the
could have
been.
first line. Yeah.
Mhm.
Tom, how about you? You have an award?
Yeah, mine is lamer. It's just like um
most affordable view of New York. Like he lives in East 55th Street in a place I could just never afford to live without any job or prospects in a fairly large apartment. So I keep going to real estate whenever I watch these movies from the 50s in New York and just how possible it seemed to live in these like midtown places. And so it's not really in the spirit of alcoholism, but that is what my mind went to when watching this.
Well, maybe the money he saves on rent, he spends on booze. That's the problem. If we raise the rent, he couldn't afford the booze, and then
Hmm.
there would be no movie.
Very
Alcoholism will
good.
be cured. We need to raise rents higher, and
To
then
cure
and then we
alcoholism.
won't we
That's
won't have a problem anymore.
spoken like a true prohibitionist.